There are athletes, there are champions, there are legends. And then there was him. A man who moved like water and struck like lightning. A man who talked in poems and fought like a warrior. A man who gave up everything for what he believed in and somehow, against all odds, got it all back. They tried to break him. They stripped away his titles. They threatened him with prison. They took away the best years of his life. But they couldn't silence him. They couldn't make him bow. He changed his name. He changed his religion. He changed the world. Some called him the greatest athlete of the 20th century. Others called him a traitor. He called himself the greatest. And eventually, even his enemies had to admit he was right. This is the story of a boy who lost a bicycle and found his destiny. A story of fists and faith, of exile and return, of sacrifice and redemption. A story of how one man's refusal to accept the world as it was helped change it into what it could be. This is the story of Muhammad Ali. Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. was born on January 17, 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky, in the segregated American South. His father, Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr., was a sign painter and muralist who had a drinking problem and a frustration with the limited opportunities available to black men in Jim Crow Kentucky. His mother, Odessa Grady Clay, was a domestic worker who was loving, religious, and devoted to her two sons. The family lived in a modest house in a black neighborhood in Louisville's West End. Young Cassius grew up in a world defined by segregation. He couldn't eat at certain restaurants, couldn't drink from certain water fountains, couldn't attend certain schools. Signs everywhere said whites only and colored. This was the reality of being black in America in the 1940s and 50s. But Cassius was not a child who accepted limitations quietly. He was energetic, talkative, confident to the point of brashness. His mother later recalled that he was always saying he was going to be somebody, that he was going to be famous. Most people dismissed it as childish boasting. They were wrong. The moment that changed everything came in October of 1954, when Cassius was 12 years old. He and a friend rode their bicycles to the Louisville Home Show, a local exhibition. When they came out, Cassius discovered his bike. A red and white Schwinn that was his prized possession had been stolen. He was furious and tearful. Someone told him there was a police officer in the basement of the building who could help. The officer was Joe Martin, who happened to run a boxing gym in that same basement. Cassius, still crying and angry, told Martin he was going to whoop whoever stole his bike. Martin, seeing a skinny 12-year-old who weighed only 89 pounds, suggested that maybe Cassius should learn how to fight first. Cassius agreed to come back to the gym. That chance encounter, a stolen bicycle, and a cop who ran a boxing gym set the course for everything that followed. Within weeks, Cassius was training obsessively. He was not a natural boxer at first. He held his hands too low. He leaned back away from punches instead of slipping them. He moved in unorthodox ways. But he was fast, incredibly, supernaturally fast. And he was dedicated in a way Martin had rarely seen. Cassius would get up before dawn to run. He would shadow box while walking to school. He would train in the gym every day after school. He stopped eating sweets. He didn't drink or smoke. While other teenagers were hanging out and chasing girls, Cassius was in the gym, perfecting his jab, working on his footwork, dreaming of championships. His first amateur fight was in 1954, a 3-round decision victory. He fought on a local television show called Tomorrow's Champions, where Louisville residents could watch young boxers compete. Cassius loved the attention. He would watch himself on TV, studying his technique but also enjoying seeing himself on screen. The seeds of showmanship were already there. Over the next 6 years, Cassius Clay compiled an amateur record of 100 wins and only 5 losses. He won 6 Kentucky Golden Gloves championships, 2 national Golden Gloves titles, and 2 national AAU championships. He was building a reputation as one of the most talented young boxers in America. But the defining moment of his amateur career came in Rome in 1960 at the Summer Olympic Games. Cassius, now 18 years old and fighting in the light heavyweight division, dominated the tournament. He won all 4 of his fights convincingly, culminating in a victory over Poland's Zbigniew Pietrzykowski in the gold medal match. Cassius Clay returned to Louisville as an Olympic champion, wearing his gold medal everywhere, even sleeping in it. He was a hero, celebrated by his hometown, but Louisville was still segregated. The story, possibly apocryphal but symbolically true, is that Cassius tried to eat at a whites-only restaurant and was refused service despite being an Olympic champion. The message was clear. In America, a black man was still a black man, gold medal or not. Whether that specific incident happened exactly as told, the broader truth is undeniable. Cassius Clay was beginning to understand that boxing skill and Olympic gold couldn't protect him from racism. This realization would shape everything that came next. In October of 1960, Cassius signed a professional contract with a syndicate of 11 white Louisville businessmen who called themselves the Louisville Sponsoring Group. They agreed to pay him a salary and manage his career. Cassius was now a professional boxer. He was 18 years old, brash, confident, and ready to shake up the world. Cassius Clay's early professional career was unlike anything boxing had seen before. Traditionally, boxers were supposed to be humble, let their fists do the talking, show respect to opponents. Cassius did the opposite. He talked constantly, predicted the round in which he would win, wrote poems mocking his opponents, and proclaimed himself the greatest, long before he had any claim to the title. "I am the greatest. I'm young, I'm handsome, I'm fast, I'm pretty, and can't possibly be beat," he would shout. "I'm the greatest thing that ever lived. I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old." The boxing establishment hated it. Sports writers called him arrogant, insufferable, a loudmouth who needed to be humbled. But the public, especially young people and black Americans, loved it. Here was a black man who refused to be humble, who celebrated himself, who didn't care what white America thought of him. In an era when black athletes were expected to be grateful and deferential, Cassius Clay was revolutionary simply by being confident. His boxing style was equally revolutionary. He fought with his hands low, relying on his incredible reflexes to avoid punches rather than blocking them. He danced around the ring, literally danced, with footwork so fast and graceful it seemed impossible for a man his size. He would lean back from punches, letting them pass an inch from his face, then counter with lightning combinations. "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee" became his motto, coined by his assistant trainer, Drew Bundini Brown. Clay's professional record was perfect through his first 19 fights. He beat everyone they put in front of him, often predicting the exact round he would win in his pre-fight poems. He was becoming famous not just for winning, but for how he won. With style, with showmanship, with an entirely new approach to boxing. In 1963, Clay became more than just a boxer. He became involved with the Nation of Islam. He had been introduced to the organization's teachings in Miami, where he trained. The Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, preached black pride, self-sufficiency, and separation from white America. They taught that white people were devils, that black people were the original humans, and that a separate black nation should be established. These ideas resonated with Clay. He had grown up in the segregated South, had faced racism despite being an Olympic champion, and was increasingly angry about the treatment of black Americans. The Nation of Islam offered him a worldview that made sense of his experiences and gave him a sense of purpose beyond boxing. Clay became close with Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam's most charismatic spokesman. Malcolm was brilliant, articulate, and uncompromising in his critique of white supremacy. He saw in Clay a young man who could be a powerful symbol for the movement. The two became friends, with Malcolm attending Clay's training camps and offering guidance. But Clay kept his involvement with the Nation of Islam secret. He knew that if the white boxing establishment knew he was associating with a group they considered radical and dangerous, it could hurt his career. So he trained, he fought, he talked his way to fame, and he privately explored a religious and political identity that would soon shock the world. By early 1964, Clay had earned a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. The champion was Charles "Sonny" Liston, one of the most fearsome fighters in boxing history. Liston was a former convict with mob connections, a scowling, powerful puncher who had demolished the previous champion, Floyd Patterson, twice in first-round knockouts. Liston was supposed to be invincible. He was heavily favoured to destroy the 22-year-old loudmouth from Louisville. The fight was scheduled for February 25, 1964, in Miami Beach. In the weeks before the fight, Clay's antics reached new levels. He showed up at Liston's house at 3 a.m, shouting challenges. At the weigh-in, Clay appeared to have a complete meltdown, screaming, "I'm gonna eat you alive," while his heart rate spiked dangerously high. The Boxing Commission considered calling off the fight, thinking Clay was having a nervous breakdown. It was all an act. Clay was psychological warfare in human form. He wanted to make Liston angry, to make him fight emotionally instead of strategically. And it worked. On fight night, Clay was brilliant. He was too fast for Liston, too elusive. He danced around the ring, avoiding Liston's power punches, then darting in with quick combinations. Liston, frustrated and confused, couldn't land clean shots on the younger man. In the 4th round, something got in Clay's eyes, possibly liniment from Liston's gloves, and he couldn't see. He wanted to quit. His trainer, Angelo Dundee, refused, shoving him back into the ring and telling him to run until his vision cleared. Clay survived. By the 6th round, Liston was exhausted and battered. When the bell rang for the 7th round, Liston stayed on his stool. He claimed a shoulder injury. The fight was over. Cassius Clay was the heavyweight champion of the world at age 22. Clay leaped around the ring, shouting at the sports writers who had doubted him. "Eat your words. I am the king. I am the greatest. I shook up the world." He had indeed shaken up the world. But the biggest shock was yet to come. The day after defeating Liston, Cassius Clay held a press conference and confirmed what had been rumoured. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. He spoke calmly and clearly about his beliefs, explaining that he didn't hate all white people, but believed in the nation's teachings about black pride and self-determination. The announcement sent shockwaves through America. The Nation of Islam was considered a hate group by many white Americans and even by some black civil rights leaders. Martin Luther King Jr. and the mainstream civil rights movement advocated integration and non-violence. The Nation of Islam preached separation and self-defense. For the heavyweight champion, a position of enormous visibility and influence, to align himself with the nation was unprecedented and controversial. A few weeks later, Elijah Muhammad gave Cassius Clay a new name, Muhammad Ali. The name Cassius Clay had been given to his ancestor by a slave owner. Ali explained. It was a slave name. Muhammad Ali was his true name, his Muslim name, his free name. From that moment forward, he insisted on being called Muhammad Ali. Many refused. Sports writers continued to call him Cassius Clay. Former champion Floyd Patterson said he would call him Clay and would beat him to reclaim the title for America. The disrespect was deliberate and racial. These same people didn't refuse to call other people by their chosen names, but they refused to respect a black Muslim man's right to define himself. Ali's response was defiant. Cassius Clay is a slave name. I didn't choose it, and I don't want it. I am Muhammad Ali. A free name, it means beloved of God, and I insist people use it when speaking to me and of me. In 1965, Ali fought Liston again in a rematch in Lewiston, Maine. The fight was controversial and bizarre. Ali knocked Liston down in the first round, with what many observers thought was a weak punch. They called it the phantom punch, because it was so hard to see. Liston stayed down, and Ali stood over him, shouting, "Get up and fight, sucker!" The fight was over in less than 2 minutes, leaving more questions than answers. Many suspected the fight was fixed, though no proof ever emerged. Meanwhile, Ali's relationship with Malcolm X had ended tragically. Malcolm had broken with the Nation of Islam in 1964, partly over differences with Elijah Muhammad's leadership, and partly over Malcolm's evolution toward a more inclusive vision of Islam and civil rights. Elijah Muhammad demanded that Nation members, including Ali, cut off all contact with Malcolm. Ali, loyal to Elijah Muhammad, complied. He refused to speak to his former mentor. In February of 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated by members of the Nation of Islam. Ali never publicly expressed regret about abandoning Malcolm, but those close to him said he privately felt guilt about it for the rest of his life. It was one of the shadows on Ali's legacy. His loyalty to Elijah Muhammad had cost him his friendship with Malcolm and had left him on the wrong side of history in that particular moment. But Ali's biggest confrontation with America was approaching, and it had nothing to do with boxing. In February of 1966, Ali was reclassified as 1A by his draft board, making him eligible for military service in the Vietnam War. He had previously been classified 1Y, qualified only in emergencies, because he had failed the Armed Forces qualifying test. Ali was not a strong reader or writer, partly because of undiagnosed dyslexia. But the military lowered its standards to feed the growing war effort, and Ali was now eligible. When reporters asked Ali about the draft, he gave an answer that would echo through history. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me." It was a devastating statement. In one sentence, Ali had articulated why many black Americans questioned fighting in Vietnam. They were being asked to die for a country that denied them basic rights, to fight for freedom abroad while being oppressed at home. Why should black men fight Vietnamese people who had never enslaved them, never lynched them, never denied them the vote? The backlash was immediate and fierce. Ali was called a traitor, a coward, un-American. Politicians denounced him. Sports writers demanded he be stripped of his title. Even many in the black community were divided. Some saw him as a hero for speaking truth. Others saw him as shirking his duty. Ali defended himself clearly. "Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called N people in Louisville are treated like dogs and denied simple human rights? No, I am not going 10,000 miles from home to help murder and burn another poor nation simply to continue the domination of white slave masters of the darker people the world over." Ali had gone from controversial athlete to political lightning rod. His fights became major events, not just for sports fans, but for the culture war dividing America. In 1966 and early 67, Ali defended his title multiple times, traveling to Europe and Canada when many American cities refused to host his fights. He was still undefeated, still the greatest in the ring. But the government was closing in. On April 28, 1967, Muhammad Ali reported to the Armed Forces Induction Center in Houston, Texas. When his name, Cassius Clay, was called to step forward and take the oath of military service, Ali refused. He stood still, silent, unwilling to take even one step toward joining an army he believed was fighting an unjust war. He was given multiple chances to comply. Each time, he refused. The officer warned him that refusing induction was a federal crime punishable by 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Ali didn't move. Within hours, the New York State Athletic Commission suspended Ali's boxing license and stripped him of his heavyweight title. Other state commissions followed. Ali was no longer the champion. He had refused to compromise his principles and it had cost him everything he had worked for since he was 12 years old. In June of 1967, an all-white jury in Houston took just 20 minutes to convict Ali of draft evasion. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $10,000. He was released on bail pending appeal, but his boxing career was over. At 25 years old, at the peak of his physical abilities, Muhammad Ali was banned from boxing. What followed were 3.5 years of exile, the prime years of Ali's athletic life. He couldn't fight professionally in America. His passport was revoked, so he couldn't fight abroad. He gave speeches at colleges, earning money to support himself and his family, but he was no longer a boxer. The skills that had made him great were deteriorating from lack of use. Ali's stance against the Vietnam War made him a hero to the anti-war movement and the counterculture. College students, protesters, civil rights activists, they saw Ali as a symbol of resistance to an unjust system. "Hell no, we won't go," became a rallying cry. Inspired partly by Ali's refusal, he had sacrificed his career for his principles, and that courage inspired millions. But Ali paid a heavy price. He lost millions of dollars in earnings. He couldn't do what he loved and did better than anyone else in the world. He faced constant harassment and surveillance by the FBI, which kept a massive file on him as part of its COINTELPRO program targeting black activists. There were credible death threats. Ali was defiant publicly, but privately, the strain was enormous. In 1969, Ali's lawyers appealed his conviction to the Supreme Court. The case, Clay versus United States, would determine whether Ali would go to prison. The central question was whether Ali's claim to conscientious objector status should have been granted. Ali argued that his Muslim faith forbade him from fighting in any war unless it was a jihad declared by his religious leaders. The government argued this was inconsistent with Nation of Islam doctrine and that Ali was trying to avoid service. While the legal battle played out, public opinion was shifting. The Vietnam War was increasingly unpopular. The Tet Offensive in 1968 had shown the war was unwinnable. American casualties were mounting. More Americans, including many who had initially condemned Ali, were beginning to question the war. Ali's stance, once seen as radical, was looking prescient. Ali's personal life was also in turmoil. He had married Sonji Roy in 1964, but the marriage lasted only 2 years, ending in divorce in 1966. Sonji refused to adopt the strict dress codes and practices of the Nation of Islam, and Ali, under pressure from the nation, divorced her. In 1967, Ali married Belinda Boyd, who took the name Khalila Ali. They would have 4 children together: Mariam, twins Jamila and Rashida, and Muhammad Ali Jr. By 1970, the pressure to allow Ali to fight again was growing. The civil rights movement had achieved major legislative victories. The anti-war movement was mainstream. Ali's exile seemed increasingly unjust. Finally, in October of 1970, Ali was granted a license to fight in Georgia, which had no state athletic commission and where officials saw an opportunity for publicity and profit. On October 26, 1970, in Atlanta, Muhammad Ali returned to the ring after 3.5 years. His opponent was Jerry Quarry, a white heavyweight from California. Ali was rusty. He hadn't fought professionally since March of 1967, but he was still faster and more skilled than Quarry. He won by TKO in the 3rd round when a cut over Quarry's eye forced the fight to be stopped. Ali was back, but he was 38 months older, 38 months removed from his physical peak, 38 months of ring rust to shake off. The years of exile had stolen something from him that he could never fully recover: his prime. The Ali who returned in 1970 was not the same Ali who had been banned in 1967. He was slower, less mobile, more willing to absorb punches. But the testing of Muhammad Ali was not over. The greatest challenges of his boxing career were still ahead. On March 8th, 1971, Muhammad Ali faced Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden in New York City in what was billed as the fight of the century. It was the most anticipated sporting event in history. Both men were undefeated. Both had legitimate claims to being the true heavyweight champion. Frazier had won the title while Ali was in exile. Both men hated each other, or at least acted like they did. The fight lived up to the hype. For 15 brutal rounds, Ali and Frazier beat each other relentlessly. Ali tried to use his speed and boxing skill, but Frazier was relentless, constantly moving forward, throwing devastating hooks to the body and head. In the 15th round, Frazier landed a crushing left hook that sent Ali crashing to the canvas, the first time Ali had been knocked down in his professional career. Ali got up, but the damage was done. Frazier won a unanimous decision. Muhammad Ali had lost for the first time in his professional career. The defeat was crushing emotionally as well as physically. Ali had believed he was invincible. Now he knew he wasn't. But something remarkable happened in defeat. Ali became more human, more sympathetic. The brash young man who proclaimed himself the greatest with no evidence had become a man who had sacrificed everything for his principles, fought his way back, and lost a brutal war in the ring. Defeat made Ali more beloved, not less. A few months later, in June of 1971, the Supreme Court unanimously overturned Ali's draft evasion conviction. The court found that the Justice Department had improperly rejected Ali's claim to conscientious objector status. After 4 years of legal battles, Ali was vindicated. He would not go to prison. His stand had been justified. Ali fought his way back toward another title shot. He defeated Jerry Quarry again, defeated Floyd Patterson, defeated Bob Foster. Then, in March of 1973, he suffered another crushing defeat, this time to Ken Norton, who broke Ali's jaw in the second round. Ali fought 10 more rounds with a broken jaw before losing a split decision. It was the lowest point of his comeback. But Ali was nothing if not resilient. 6 months later, he fought Norton again and won a split decision, avenging the defeat. Then, in January of 1974, Ali faced Joe Frazier in a rematch at Madison Square Garden. This time, Ali won a unanimous decision, though it was another brutal, close fight. Ali had lost his mystique of invincibility, but he had gained something perhaps more valuable: the respect that comes from enduring suffering and continuing to fight. Meanwhile, the heavyweight championship was held by George Foreman, who had destroyed Joe Frazier in 1973, knocking him down 6 times in 2 rounds. Foreman was young, powerful, and terrifying. He had won all 40 of his professional fights, 37 by knockout. Many of those knockouts came in the first or second round. Foreman was considered the hardest puncher in boxing history. Ali wanted one more shot at the title. He was 32 years old in 1974, old for a heavyweight, and he had already been through wars with Frazier and Norton. The smart move would have been to retire wealthy and relatively healthy. But Ali couldn't resist. He needed to prove he was still the greatest. He needed to win back the title that had been stolen from him. The fight was scheduled for September 25, 1974, in Kinshasa, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The fight was called the Rumble in the Jungle, and it was promoted by Don King, who had put together a deal with Zaire's dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko, to host the fight. Each fighter would be paid $5 million, an unprecedented sum. Ali arrived in Zaire weeks before the fight to train and acclimate. He was greeted as a hero by the Zairean people. They chanted, "Ali, Bomaye! Ali, kill him!" Ali embraced being in Africa, saying he felt at home, that Black Americans needed to connect with their African heritage. He turned the fight into a symbol of Black pride and African identity. But almost no one thought Ali could win. Foreman was a monster. Ali was old and had taken too many punches. The experts predicted Foreman would knock Ali out early. Even Ali's own team feared for his safety. Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer, prepared for the worst. Ali had a different plan. The rumble in the jungle began at 4 in the morning local time, so it could be broadcast live in the United States during prime time. Nearly 60,000 people filled the stadium in Kinshasa. The crowd was chanting for Ali. Foreman looked grim and determined. When the fight began, Ali did something unexpected. Instead of dancing and moving as he always had, he retreated to the ropes and let Foreman hit him. Round after round, Foreman threw massive punches while Ali covered up, leaning against the ropes, absorbing the blows. Ali's team was horrified. What was he doing? He was going to get killed. But Ali had a plan. The ropes in Kinshasa were loose, allowing Ali to lean back and absorb some of the force of Foreman's punches. Ali was also talking to Foreman the whole time. "Is that all you got, George? They told me you could hit hard. You can't hit, you punch like a girl." The psychological warfare never stopped. Ali later called this strategy the rope-a-dope. Make yourself look like a dope by leaning on the ropes, but actually rope your opponent into exhausting himself. Foreman threw hundreds of punches, many of them landing, but Ali's defense was brilliant. He blocked, he deflected, he rolled with the punches. He made Foreman miss just enough. And with every round, Foreman got more tired. By the 8th round, Foreman was exhausted. His arms felt like lead. He couldn't hurt Ali no matter how hard he tried. And then Ali struck. He came off the ropes with a combination of punches that staggered Foreman. A right hand to the temple sent Foreman crashing to the canvas. The referee counted to 10. George Foreman, the most fearsome puncher in boxing, had been knocked out. Muhammad Ali, at 32, had done the impossible. He had reclaimed the heavyweight championship of the world. He danced around the ring, shouting, "I told you! I am the greatest! I am the king!" And this time, it was undeniable. He had lost everything, been exiled, fought his way back, and conquered the most dangerous opponent in boxing. He really was the greatest. The victory in Zaire made Ali more than a boxer. He was a global icon, celebrated in Africa, in the Muslim world, in America, everywhere. The man who had been stripped of his title and called a traitor was now universally recognized as a hero. Even those who had condemned him in the 60s now praised him in the 70s. Ali had won more than a boxing match. He had won vindication. But Ali couldn't stop fighting. In 1975, he fought Joe Frazier for the 3rd time, this time in Manila, Philippines, in what was called the Thriller in Manila. It was the most brutal fight of Ali's career. For 14 rounds, Ali and Frazier beat each other with a savagery that went beyond sport. Both men were nearly dead on their feet by the end. Frazier's corner stopped the fight before the 15th round, making Ali the winner. But both men were hospitalized afterward. Ali later said the Thriller in Manila was the closest he ever came to dying. Frazier said he wanted to kill Ali in the ring. The fight marked both men permanently, physically and emotionally. It was glorious and terrible, the essence of boxing's brutality and courage distilled into 45 minutes of violence. Ali continued fighting through the late 70s, defending his title multiple times, but he should have retired after Manila. He was taking too many punches. His speed was gone. He was fighting on courage and reputation, not ability. In 1978, a young fighter named Leon Spinks, who had only 7 professional fights, defeated Ali in a stunning upset. Ali was 36, slow and vulnerable. 7 months later, Ali fought Spinks again and won, becoming the first 3-time heavyweight champion. It was a triumphant moment, but it was also sad. Ali announced his retirement after the fight, saying he was done. He should have been. He had nothing left to prove. But in 1980, Ali came back to fight Larry Holmes, his former sparring partner who now held the heavyweight title. It was a disaster. Holmes dominated Ali, who looked old, slow, and helpless. Ali's corner stopped the fight after 10 rounds. It was painful to watch. Ali fought once more, in 1981, losing to Trevor Berbick in a lackluster fight that no one wanted to see. Ali was 39, a shadow of what he had been. His record was 56 wins and 5 losses, with 37 knockouts. He had been heavyweight champion 3 times, had fought in some of the greatest fights in history, and had become the most famous athlete on earth. But the price was about to become clear. By the early 1980s, those close to Muhammad Ali noticed something was wrong. His speech was slurred. His movements were slow and stiff. His face, once so animated and expressive, was becoming a mask. In 1984, Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome, a neurological condition similar to Parkinson's disease. The cause was almost certainly the thousands of punches Ali had taken during his career, particularly in his later fights, when he could no longer move like he once had. The rope-a-dope strategy, brilliant as it was, had involved taking hundreds of punches. The wars with Frazier and Foreman, the beating from Holmes, all of it had damaged Ali's brain. He was suffering from what doctors now call chronic traumatic encephalopathy, though that term wasn't widely used at the time. The diagnosis was devastating but not surprising. Ali had always known that boxing caused damage, but knowing it intellectually and experiencing it physically were different things. Ali was still only in his 40s when his health began to deteriorate rapidly. The man who had been the fastest, most graceful athlete in sports was now moving in slow motion, struggling to perform simple physical tasks. But Ali refused to hide. He could have retreated from public life, avoided the cameras, spent his remaining years in privacy. Instead, he became even more of a public figure. He traveled the world as a goodwill ambassador. He met with world leaders, advocated for humanitarian causes, and raised money for Parkinson's research. His message was clear. Even diminished, even struggling, he was still Muhammad Ali, and he still had work to do. Ali's spiritual life also evolved. In 1975, Elijah Muhammad had died, and the Nation of Islam began to transform under new leadership. Ali, along with many others, transitioned to mainstream Sunni Islam. He repudiated the nation's racial teachings and embraced a more universal understanding of Islam. He became a Sunni Muslim, making the pilgrimage to Mecca and studying the Quran seriously. This transformation was profound. The Ali of the 60s had preached black separatism and had called white people devils. The Ali of the 80s and beyond preached peace, love, and the unity of all people under God. He had evolved, matured, and found a deeper spirituality. He regretted some of his earlier statements and was working toward reconciliation. In 1986, Ali traveled to Iraq to negotiate the release of 15 American hostages held by Saddam Hussein. He succeeded, bringing the hostages home. In 1990, he traveled to Iraq again, meeting with Hussein before the Gulf War. Critics said he was being used by dictators, but Ali believed he was working for peace. Ali's personal life was complicated. He had divorced Khalila in 1976 after years of infidelity on his part. In 1977, he married Veronica Porcher, with whom he had 2 daughters, Hana and Layla. That marriage ended in divorce in 1986. In 1986, Ali married Yolanda Lonnie Williams, a woman he had known since she was a child in Louisville. Lonnie would become Ali's primary caretaker and protector for the rest of his life. Ali also had children from relationships outside his marriages. In total, he had 9 children, including Laila Ali, who had become a successful professional boxer herself, going undefeated in 24 fights. The irony of Ali, who had sacrificed so much for his principles, being a flawed father and husband, was not lost on those who knew him. He was a great man, but not always a good man in his personal relationships. As Ali's Parkinson's progressed through the 1990s, his physical abilities continued to decline. His hands trembled constantly. His speech became so soft and slurred that many people could barely understand him. Walking became difficult. Simple tasks like eating or getting dressed required assistance. The transformation was heartbreaking to witness. The man who had floated like a butterfly could now barely shuffle. Yet Ali's spirit seemed undiminished. He communicated through gestures, smiles, and occasional whispered words. He performed magic tricks for children, signed autographs for hours despite his trembling hands, and maintained his sense of humor. When asked if he had any regrets about boxing given his condition, Ali indicated no. Boxing had given him a platform to stand for his principles, to inspire millions, to become Muhammad Ali. The price was high, but he had paid it willingly. In 1996, Ali was given one of the greatest honors of his life. At the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, Ali was chosen to light the Olympic cauldron during the opening ceremony. When he appeared on the platform, torch in hand, his hands trembling visibly from Parkinson's, the stadium erupted. People around the world watching on television wept. Here was the Olympic champion from Rome in 1960, now 64 years old and struggling with illness, coming full circle to light the Olympic flame. The image of Ali, hands shaking, struggling to hold the torch steady but refusing to give up until he had lit the flame, became one of the most iconic moments in Olympic history. It was a metaphor for his entire life. Struggle, perseverance, and ultimate triumph despite overwhelming obstacles. The young man who had supposedly thrown his Olympic gold medal into a river in disgust at American racism. A story Ali later admitted was fictional, was now being honored by the same country that had once stripped him of his name, title, and threatened him with prison. The ceremony represented something profound. America's reconciliation with Muhammad Ali. The country that had vilified him in the 60s now celebrated him as a national hero. Ali had outlasted his critics. History had vindicated him. The Vietnam War was universally acknowledged as a mistake. The civil rights movement had achieved legal equality. Ali's refusal to fight in Vietnam, once seen as treasonous, was now seen as courageous. His transformation from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, once seen as threatening, was now seen as an assertion of dignity and identity. Ali received countless awards and honors in his later years. In 2005, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor, from President George W. Bush. In 2009, he received the Presidential Citizens Medal. Sports Illustrated named him Sportsman of the Century. He appeared on lists of the most influential people of the 20th century. The man who had been stripped of everything in 1967 was showered with recognition and praise in his final decades. But perhaps more meaningful than official honors was the love ordinary people showed Ali wherever he went. People of all races, religions, and nationalities approached him with reverence and affection. To many, especially Muslims and people of color around the world, Ali was a symbol of pride and resistance. He had stood up when it cost him everything. He had refused to be silent or submissive. He had been unapologetically black, unapologetically Muslim, unapologetically himself. Ali's health continued to decline through the 2000s and 2010s. He was hospitalized multiple times for respiratory issues, infections, and other complications. Lonnie Ali protected him fiercely, controlling access and making sure he wasn't exploited or exhausted by public appearances. Ali appeared less frequently in public, but when he did, crowds still gathered, cameras still flashed, and people still wanted to touch the legend. In 2013, Ali attended the premiere of a Broadway musical about his life. In 2014, he attended the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Awards, an annual event honoring people who embodied Ali's values of giving back. In 2015, he appeared at a ceremony honoring the 50th anniversary of his famous fight with Sonny Liston. Each appearance showed Ali more diminished physically, but the crowd's adoration never wavered. On June 3, 2016, Muhammad Ali was hospitalized in Scottsdale, Arizona, with respiratory problems. His condition quickly deteriorated. family members gathered at his bedside. On June 3rd, at 9:10 p.m., Muhammad Ali died at age 74. The cause was septic shock due to unspecified natural causes, though his Parkinson's had contributed to his declining health for over 3 decades. The world mourned. Tributes poured in from presidents, athletes, celebrities, religious leaders, and ordinary people. President Barack Obama said, "Muhammad Ali shook up the world, and the world is better for it." Boxing champions from across generations praised him as the greatest. World leaders acknowledged his humanitarian work. Millions of social media posts celebrated his life and legacy. A memorial service was held in Ali's hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, on June 10, 2016. It was a remarkable event that reflected Ali's complexity and breadth of influence. Speakers included former President Bill Clinton, comedian Billy Crystal, journalist Bryant Gumbel, and a representative of the Nation of Islam. Thousands lined the streets of Louisville as Ali's funeral procession passed through the city, a homecoming for the boy from the West End who had become the most famous person on earth. Ali was buried at Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville. His grave is simple, marked by a modest headstone, in keeping with Islamic tradition. The man who had proclaimed himself the greatest, who had lived one of the most public lives imaginable, was laid to rest quietly, his body returned to the earth of the city where it all began. Muhammad Ali's death ended a life, but his legacy is eternal. To understand Ali's impact, we must look at what he changed and what he represented across multiple dimensions: sports, politics, culture, religion, and human consciousness itself. The boxing legacy. In purely sporting terms, Ali revolutionized boxing. His style, hands low, dancing, leaning away from punches, relying on speed and reflexes, was considered unorthodox and risky, but it worked at the highest level. He proved that heavyweight boxers didn't have to be slow, plodding punchers. They could be fast, graceful, and strategic. Ali's trilogy with Joe Frazier and his fights with George Foreman and Sonny Liston are considered among the greatest in boxing history. The Rumble in the Jungle and the Thriller in Manila are studied by boxing analysts and historians as masterpieces of strategy, courage, and will. Ali's rope-a-dope against Foreman showed that boxing was as much about psychology and tactics as about physical ability. But Ali's impact on boxing went beyond technique. He made boxing glamorous and global. His fights were international events watched by billions. He brought personality, poetry, and showmanship to a sport that had often been grim and violent. He proved that fighters could be articulate, witty, and culturally significant beyond their physical abilities. The debate over whether Ali was the greatest boxer of all time continues. Arguments can be made for others: Sugar Ray Robinson, Willie Pep, Joe Louis, but Ali's combination of skill, achievement, and cultural impact is unmatched. He fought the best fighters of his era, won the heavyweight championship 3 times, and did it while missing 3.5 years in his prime. His record speaks for itself, but his influence transcends records. The political and social legacy. Ali's refusal to fight in Vietnam was one of the defining moments of the 20th century. At a time when dissent was equated with cowardice or treason, Ali stood up and said no. He was willing to sacrifice his title, his income, his freedom, and his career for his principles. This act of courage inspired millions of people, especially young people and people of color, to question authority and stand up for their beliefs. Ali's statement, "I ain't got no quarrel with them, Viet Cong," crystallized the contradiction at the heart of the Vietnam War for many Americans. Black men were being drafted to fight for freedom in Southeast Asia, while being denied freedom at home. Ali gave voice to this hypocrisy and paid the price, but his sacrifice helped shift public opinion against the war. Beyond Vietnam, Ali was a symbol of black pride and self-determination during the civil rights era. His insistence on being called Muhammad Ali instead of Cassius Clay was an assertion of identity and autonomy. His membership in the Nation of Islam, controversial as it was, represented a rejection of white supremacy and an embrace of black self-sufficiency. Ali refused to be what white America wanted him to be: humble, grateful, accommodating. He was loud, proud, and unapologetic. This representation was revolutionary. In an era when black athletes were expected to be apolitical, Ali was intensely political. When they were expected to be quiet, he talked constantly. When they were expected to know their place, he proclaimed himself the greatest. He showed a generation of black Americans that they didn't have to accept second-class status, that they could define themselves on their own terms. Ali's political evolution, from Nation of Islam separatism to Sunni Islam's universal brotherhood, also showed growth and wisdom. The Ali of the 1980s and beyond repudiated the racial hatred of his earlier years and embraced a more inclusive vision. He showed that people can change, can mature, can move beyond earlier mistakes while still standing by their core principles. The religious legacy. Ali's conversion to Islam and his insistence on being recognized as a Muslim was groundbreaking for Muslim representation in America. Before Ali, most Americans knew little about Islam, and what they knew was often negative. Ali showed that Muslims could be patriotic Americans, despite his criticism of specific American policies, could be champions, could be beloved. For Muslims around the world, especially black Muslims in America, Ali was a hero and role model. He showed that you could be Muslim in America, could practice your faith openly, could refuse to compromise your religious principles, even when pressured by the most powerful institutions in society. His pilgrimage to Mecca, his study of the Quran, his charitable work in Muslim communities, all of this elevated the visibility and respectability of Islam in American culture. Ali's later embrace of Sunni Islam and his message of universal peace and brotherhood also showed Islam in a positive light during a period when it was often portrayed negatively, particularly after the events of September 11th, 2001. Ali stood as a counterexample to stereotypes about Muslims being violent or anti-American. He was a Muslim and a humanitarian, a Muslim and a patriot in the sense of wanting America to live up to its ideals, a Muslim and a symbol of peace, the cultural icon. Beyond sports, politics, and religion, Ali became a cultural icon whose influence spread into every area of society. He appeared in films, television shows, and documentaries. Books about him numbered in the hundreds. His quotes were repeated and referenced constantly. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I am the greatest. Impossible is nothing. Don't count the days. Make the days count. Ali's image, the raised fists, the beautiful face, the powerful body, appeared on posters, t-shirts, murals, and artwork around the world. Artists like Andy Warhol made him a subject. Photographers like Neil Leifer captured iconic images of him. Filmmakers told his story repeatedly, most notably in the documentary When We Were Kings, about the Rumble in the Jungle, which won an Academy Award. Musicians paid tribute to Ali across genres. The Fugees, R.E.M., Johnny Wakelin, and countless others wrote songs about him. Hip-hop artists, in particular, embraced Ali as an ancestor and inspiration. His combination of athletic excellence, verbal dexterity, showmanship, and resistance to authority made him a natural icon for hip-hop culture. Ali's influence extended globally in ways few American athletes ever achieved. He was beloved in Africa, where his fight in Zaire had made him a symbol of black pride and Pan-Africanism. He was beloved in the Muslim world, where his faith made him a brother. He was beloved in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. A poll in the late 1990s found that Ali was the most recognized person on earth, known by more people than any religious figure, political leader, or entertainer. This global appeal came partly from his boxing skill, but mostly from what he represented: courage, principle, self-belief, and the ability to overcome adversity. People around the world facing their own struggles, against colonialism, against dictatorship, against poverty, against injustice, saw in Ali someone who had fought similar battles and won. He was proof that resistance was possible, that sacrifice could lead to vindication, that standing for principle could ultimately triumph. The human legacy. Perhaps Ali's most important legacy is simply the example he set of how to live. He showed that you could be great and still be humble in certain ways, that you could be confident without being cruel, that you could stand for principle even when it cost everything, that you could make mistakes and still grow, that you could face decline and death with grace and courage. Ali's life was not without flaws. He was unfaithful to his wives. He was sometimes cruel in his trash talk, particularly to Joe Frazier, whom he called an Uncle Tom and insulted repeatedly. He could be selfish and self-absorbed. He stayed in boxing too long and paid a terrible price. He wasn't a perfect human being, and he never claimed to be. But Ali's flaws made his achievements more impressive, not less. He was human, with human weaknesses, yet he accomplished extraordinary things. He showed that you don't have to be perfect to be great, that you don't have to be a saint to stand up for what's right, that you can be complex and contradictory and still be a hero. The image of Ali lighting the Olympic torch in 1996, hands trembling, struggling but persevering, captures his essence. He had been knocked down by Frazier, by the U.S. government, by Parkinson's disease, but he always got back up. He endured suffering but maintained his dignity and his sense of humor. He faced his own mortality with the same courage he had shown in the ring. No discussion of Muhammad Ali would be complete without examining his words. Ali was a poet, a philosopher, and a master of language. His quotes are memorable not just because they're clever, but because they express profound truths about confidence, struggle, and human potential. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The hands can't hit what the eyes can't see. This quote, created with his assistant trainer, Bundini Brown, perfectly captured Ali's fighting style. But it also captured something deeper. The idea that grace and power can coexist. That you can be beautiful and dangerous. That the best way to win isn't always through brute force, but through elegance and intelligence. I am the greatest, I said that, even before I knew I was. This is Ali's philosophy of positive self-talk and manifestation before those concepts became popular. Ali believed that if you proclaimed yourself great, if you truly believed it, you would find a way to make it true. Confidence wasn't arrogance to Ali. It was a necessary foundation for achievement. You have to believe in yourself before anyone else will. Impossible is nothing. Later used as an Adidas advertising slogan, this quote reflected Ali's rejection of limitations. People said it was impossible for him to beat Sonny Liston. He did it. They said it was impossible for him to come back after 3 years in exile. He did it. They said it was impossible for him to beat George Foreman. He did it. Ali lived as though limits were illusions, and often he proved they were. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. Ali risked everything, his title, his freedom, his career, when he refused to fight in Vietnam. This quote reflects his belief that meaningful achievement requires courage, that safety and significance are often incompatible, that you have to be willing to lose everything to gain what truly matters. I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. This quote reveals the discipline behind the showmanship. Ali wasn't a natural talent who succeeded effortlessly. He worked harder than his opponents. He got up before dawn to run. He trained when he didn't feel like it. He understood that temporary suffering could lead to permanent glory, and he was willing to pay that price. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. This quote reflected Ali's belief that success brought responsibility. He used his fame to advocate for causes he believed in, to help people, to make the world better. He could have focused solely on making money and enjoying his celebrity, but he believed that his talents and platform came with an obligation to serve others. The man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. Ali said this reflecting on his own evolution from the militant separatism of his Nation of Islam years to the universal brotherhood of his Sunni Islam period. He acknowledged that he had changed, that he had learned, that some of his earlier views were wrong. This quote shows Ali's humility and his recognition that growth and change are signs of wisdom, not weakness. Don't count the days, make the days count. This was Ali's philosophy of living purposefully. Every day was an opportunity to train, to improve, to make a difference. He didn't wait for life to happen to him. He made it happen. This proactive approach to life was central to how Ali achieved so much in his 74 years. I am America. I am the part you won't recognize, but get used to me. Black, confident, cocky. My name, not yours. My religion, not yours. My goals, my own. Get used to me. This quote, from later in his life, reflected Ali's complicated relationship with America. He was critical of American racism and imperialism, but he was also deeply American in his individualism, his self-confidence, his belief that he could define himself on his own terms. Ali represented the America that many wanted to ignore, black, Muslim, defiant. But he insisted on his right to be American on his own terms. I'm not the greatest, I'm the double greatest. Not only do I knock 'em out, I pick the round. Pure Ali bravado, but with a deeper point. Ali didn't just want to win, he wanted to control the narrative completely. He wanted to demonstrate such mastery that he could predict the outcome. This wasn't just confidence, it was a form of psychological warfare and showmanship that made his fights entertainment as much as sport. These quotes, and hundreds more, made Ali one of the most quotable figures in history. His words were funny, profound, provocative, and memorable. They revealed a man who thought deeply about life, who used language as skillfully as he used his fists, and who understood that words could inspire people long after punches were forgotten. Muhammad Ali died in 2016, but in many ways, he is more alive now than ever. His image and his words are everywhere. New generations discover him through documentaries, movies, books, and social media. His fights are watched on YouTube by people who weren't born when he retired. His quotes are shared and repeated daily. His example continues to inspire. But who was Muhammad Ali really? He was many things. He was the greatest boxer who ever lived, or at least one of them, which is close enough. He was a conscientious objector who sacrificed everything for his principles. He was a black man who refused to accept second-class status. He was a Muslim who practiced his faith openly in a country that often feared and hated Muslims. He was a poet and a philosopher who understood the power of words. He was a showman who made sports entertainment. He was a humanitarian who used his fame to help others. He was a flawed human being who made mistakes in his personal life. He was a symbol of resistance and courage for oppressed people worldwide. He was a victim of boxing's brutality who paid with his health for his glory. He was all of these things, and the contradictions don't diminish him. They make him human, complex, real. If we try to extract lessons from Ali's life, what would they be? Believe in yourself, absolutely. Ali's self-confidence was his superpower. He believed he was the greatest before anyone else did, and that belief became self-fulfilling. Confidence isn't arrogance if you're willing to work hard enough to back it up. Stand up for your principles no matter the cost. Ali could have said yes to the draft, served his time somewhere safe, and kept his title and his money. He chose principle over convenience, and though it cost him dearly in the short term, history vindicated him. Use your platform for good. Ali understood that fame was a tool that could be used to make the world better. He spoke out against injustice, advocated for his beliefs, and tried to help people. He didn't waste his influence on trivial things. Embrace who you are unapologetically. Ali refused to be Cassius Clay when he wanted to be Muhammad Ali. He refused to be quiet when he had something to say. He refused to pretend to be anything other than what he was. That authenticity was central to his power. Persevere through suffering. Ali was knocked down, exiled, stripped of his title, diagnosed with Parkinson's, and faced countless other setbacks. He kept going. He kept fighting, kept standing up, kept moving forward even when his body betrayed him. Evolve and grow. Ali wasn't static. He changed his views, grew in his understanding, repudiated some of his earlier positions. He showed that growth is a sign of strength, that admitting you are wrong takes more courage than stubbornly clinging to error. Face death with courage. Ali's final years, struggling with Parkinson's, could have been pathetic and sad. Instead, he faced his decline with grace, humor, and continued service to others. He showed that how you face suffering and death is as important as how you face triumph. Muhammad Ali was not perfect. He hurt people with his words. He was unfaithful. He stayed in boxing too long. He made decisions that harmed himself and others. But perfection was never the point. The point was courage, principle, self-belief, and the refusal to accept limits imposed by others. When we remember Muhammad Ali, we should remember all of him. The glory and the flaws, the triumphs and the tragedies, the beautiful young man dancing in the ring, and the trembling older man lighting the Olympic torch. All of it was Ali, and all of it matters. In the end, Ali was right about himself. He really was the greatest, not just because of his boxing skill, though that was extraordinary, but because of what he represented and what he inspired in others. He showed that one person could change the world by refusing to accept it as it was. He showed that courage and principle could triumph over power. He showed that you could be knocked down and still win. The boy from Louisville who had his bicycle stolen became the most famous person on earth. The young boxer who talked too much became the voice of a generation. The man who lost everything by standing up for his beliefs became a symbol of integrity and courage for all time. Muhammad Ali shook up the world, and the world is better for it. He floated like a butterfly, stung like a bee, and left a legacy that will last as long as people value courage, principle, and the human capacity for greatness. Rest in peace, champ. You really were the greatest.